Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is New York City Councilmember Tiffany Cabán. Councilmember, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
On Monday, a jury in New York City found Daniel Penny not guilty of criminally negligent homicide in the death of Jordan Neely. And just to recap the case, in May of 2023, Penny, a Marine veteran, used a chokehold on Jordan Neely, a homeless black man on the subway who witnesses said was acting in a threatening manner. Prosecutors say that Penny went too far and Neely died shortly thereafter. This has been really a lightning rod case encompassing issues like race, mental illness, crime, and homelessness. First, to start off the conversation, what is your reaction to the verdict?
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head when you use the word lightning rod, right? This is a case and an incident and a story that hits a lot of different things: race, class, mental illness, housing and homelessness, violence, safety. And so I have a few really initial reactions, and like a lot of folks, they're almost visceral, right? Like they kind of live in your body. Some. The first is that this verdict was not unexpected. We have seen verdicts like this time and time again. But I immediately think of a couple of truths. One is that while not unexpected, we also were never going to get true accountability, true justice from our criminal legal system, because it just wasn't designed to do that. And I'm happy to talk to you more about that. And then the second thing is that, we have a young black man living with severe mental health issues, experiencing homelessness intermittently, who was killed by Daniel Penny on the subway. And everything leading up to and following that incident could have been prevented. And that's the other thing that I think a lot about.
So let's start with that first piece that you said, because you have a history. You were a public defender. So talk to us about how the system was set up really to fail.
Yeah. Like you said, I was a public defender. I spent over 7 years as a public defender right here in New York City, practicing in Manhattan criminal court. I represented over 1,000 clients, everything from turnstile jumping to homicide. Like, I have seen it all. And one thing that is really clear about the system is not really set up to, one, get us the thing that actually it falsely promises, right? When you think about what you want from our justice system, is you want to increase the safety of our communities. That's like the end goal, right? And in a lot of ways, it just doesn't do that because of how it's designed. You can prosecute, you can punish, you can put into jail or prison, and you can isolate somebody from the community for a period of time. But ultimately, the vast majority of people are going to end up back in our communities. And when you talk to survivors of violence or survivors of harm, the most important things to them, above punishment, above retribution, very human feelings, right? Very human desire, better or worse, is that victims and survivors, they want to be able to heal. They want to never be hurt in the same way again, and they want nobody else to be hurt in the same way again. And those last two pieces really require that the person who did the harm has a change in behavior. And so how do we change behavior? Locking somebody up in a jail or prison, especially if the root cause is severe mental illness, that's not going to get to change behavior. Only a really good access to continuous care can do that. And so that's what I mean about accountability and justice. Like, what is going to get us to a place where this person isn't a danger to themselves or others? What is going to get us to a place where people on all fronts, everybody involved, can feel confident that they can be healthy and safe?
Let's talk about that a little bit, because I think both sides of the aisle here have agreed there is a mental health crisis in this country and in cities in particular. And this kind of illuminates that there is a homelessness crisis. How do we fix that? Because you said that at certain points, the system really also failed Neely in these aspects too.
Yes. We need better infrastructure, and there's a lot of yes ands involved. It's funny because myself and the mayor of New York City, we tend to disagree on quite a bit of things, but there's something that we agree on entirely, and it's that we do have a mental health crisis in our city. We need to see more access to mental health care. In fact, he said, I think even yesterday, like, part of the tragedy here is that we need more access to mental health care, but also that means we got to put our money where our mouth is and make sure that we have enough of the right workers to be available for people who need that healthcare. We have to have the infrastructure and institutions available, and we actually have a good amount of that in the city, but it's not nearly enough. We have things that work pretty well, but we have not scaled them to the size of the problem that we're facing. So it's not readily available for every person who needs it. And I'll give you just a few quick examples. We have mental health clubhouses that are places where people living with mental health diagnoses can be and engage with on a regular basis. That research data evidence shows makes a huge difference. We have crisis respite centers. They don't run 24/7 a lot of the time. There's not enough of them. We have some supportive housing. We don't have nearly enough of it, because housing is important, but you have to have the right kind of housing. And the reality is that some people need a specific kind of living environment with supports to be able to be healthy and safe. And we are not even close. And to give you a quick example of our budget priorities, we budget over $11 billion for our NYPD. We budget just over $700 million for the Department of Health and Mental Hygiene. Now, that's not the only place where we are using those dollars to address mental health issues, but it's one of the main ones. And that's a stark difference. And then you can sort of see and understand how what we're putting in is not enough to get the results that we need.
I want to turn to Daniel Penny because a civil rights attorney last week called him a killer to me. He's been called everything from a killer to a good Samaritan. He's been hailed a hero. The New York Post editorial board wrote this: in acquitting Penny, the jury resoundingly rejected Bragg's progressive pro-crime agenda, which has turned Gotham into a playground for recidivist criminals and an open-air psychiatric ward for the mentally unwell. The people harmed most by this madness are the very communities that progressives claim they want to help: low-income minority New Yorkers. Governor Hochul, if she cares about crime, should take note and finally remove Bragg from office. And Alvin Bragg is the Manhattan District Attorney. What do you think of their dialysis there?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I think as leaders, as elected officials, as policymakers, as legislators, what we need to address or get results on is health and safety, which actually is different and more specific than addressing quote unquote crime, right? And I want us to get the best health and safety outcomes that we possibly can. It's also true that people who live with mental health issues, who experience homelessness, who live at the intersection of both, they are actually much more likely to be victims of harm than other folks who aren't experiencing those things, right? And so, what I have found, which is actually a really, really beautiful thing, is that the compassionate approach is the approach that's supported by empirical evidence, by research, right? That we know works better than what we're doing. We're not going to police and incarcerate ourselves out of the crises of mental health and homelessness or substance use disorder. And let's look at Jordan Neely and that day and everybody else that was present there. Everyone in that situation was failed by our system. We should have a system in place that has success with reducing the numbers of acute mental health crises that people experience, because people live with mental health diagnoses every single day, and there are people who have access to the care they need, and they are raising their families. They have a career. They are in their homes, and a lot of times the difference is that stability, right? That access to that care. But for the folks on the train who were presented with somebody in acute crisis and didn't know what to make of it, didn't know how to respond, didn't know how to assess those threats, which, by the way, an emergency mental health responder would know how to assess those things, might not be afraid of those outbursts and say there isn't a physical danger here, but we know how to de-escalate the situation, which we have responders like that. We have BHERD, which is an emergency mental health response, but we only pilot it in our city. It's a very small team covering very small areas. So it wasn't fair to Jordan. We failed him. We failed the people on the train. I certainly never want a person like Daniel Penny in a situation where he feels like he needs to intervene in that way, especially when using that kind of force And, for me, my job as a legislature is to look forward and say, hey, what can we do on a broad-based infrastructure and policy scale so that context that existed in that moment, we can make sure that we're changing the context, that the likelihood of that perfect storm of things being present at once is reduced as much as humanly possible. And those are things that we can do.
I mean, it really is a tragic case, a tragic scenario all around. But from the perspective of your law background, when you're looking at DA Bragg, do you have any criticisms of him when it comes to this case?
Listen, it's really, really hard. Obviously, I'm a lawyer. I'm a trial attorney. I have engaged with that office before DA Bragg, under DA Cyrus Vance, and I rightfully, like, it's hard to say because I don't know what I wasn't in court every day. I don't know how the prosecution decided to litigate their case. I don't know what exactly I wasn't there for what we called voir dire, jury selection. I don't know exactly who made it to the jury, right? Like all of these different strategies and things will look different. I don't know what even some of the legal issues that were litigated outside of the view of the jury looked like, and that all can affect the outcome of a trial, right? And I think also a lot of people don't know that there's a lot of litigating that happens in a trial that is by rule done outside of the view of the jury that affects what kinds of arguments each side can make, what kinds of evidence could be presented to the jury, all of these different kinds of things. So I can't say that. I mean, I can critique the system as a whole, the office as a whole. We have a system that by design, no matter who's the DA, no matter who the line prosecutors are, we're going to see one that has disproportionately adverse effects and outcomes for Black and brown, lower income New Yorkers, or people who are living at the intersection of poverty, mental health, substance use. And that's a problem. And we need systemic solutions to reduce that harm.
I know earlier in this conversation you said no one on that subway car that day was put in a good position. And you ride the subway, I'm sure you're a New Yorker. I ride the subway, I'm a New Yorker. Everyone has that subway story. A New York City lawmaker posted earlier this year what are people supposed to do when they're on the subway? Someone's acting erratically, someone's acting in a threatening way. There's a passenger on the train and acting in an unruly manner. What do you say to that?
Yeah, I mean, again, it has to be a yes and approach. One, there are lots of things that we can do to reduce the number of times that happens, and that in itself is going to be important and make us safer. The other thing is that there's lots of things in between. There are unfortunately there's a lot of politicization of the folks that we find in our communities that are people who need help. The way that we talk about behavior even. And determining whether something is immediately dangerous or not. And I touched on that a little bit before, but there's lots of things you can do so that an incident doesn't escalate. Now, I'm not saying that everybody should do this in every situation. I want to be very clear about that. But there are tools. There are lots of really great community groups that do what we call de-escalation training, specifically around staying safe on the subways. I have a few groups in my district, in fact, who do that work. And there's the de-escalation 5Ds, which is like, you can ask for help, you can distract, you can delay, there's lots of different little tools that everyday people actually can come across. You think about it, and interpersonally, we deal with lots of different conflict or kind of unpredictable situations all the time. And being able to be mindful of that, practice them, being aware of your surroundings, are all things that can help you feel and be safer in the moment. I think also, and it shouldn't just be on the hands of the everyday person to be able to de-escalate every situation on their own, but you should know that there are opportunities there for us to keep each other safe. It's not the be all end all, and you should only do it if you feel equipped and safe to do so. But again, it is the government's responsibility to deploy a workforce that meets the needs of our communities on any given day. Like you said, people who take the subway, How many police officers do you see in a subway station, in a platform, or in a car? It's a lot, right? There's almost like an omnipresence of it. Well, what if we also had that kind of an omnipresence of, or instead of, we had an omnipresence of people who are equipped with engaging with folks with mental health issues, or other issues. Like, if that person is there and ready to be called and can react quickly, that's what we need. And it's not a pie in the sky thing. It actually exists on a smaller scale at different areas. It exists in places across the country. We have it here, again, like I said, in some spots. And so it's got to be this everything approach.
As you and I have really been talking about this entire conversation, this case and instance really sits at the intersection of race, of mental illness, of a mental health crisis, of crime, of homelessness. So I know you said that the verdict was pretty expected here. What do you think? Do you think that this case will set a precedent?
I mean, it's the continuation of a precedent, right? Again, and it's a little bit of a trigger warning, I guess, but how many times have we witnessed a Black man, particularly a Black man with mental health issues, being killed, and that being like the wrong response, and the lack of care being the precursor to that. We saw Kowalski Trawick killed by the police, who, while he was living in supportive housing with mental health care, like had everybody engaging with him knew what his needs were. He wasn't a threat to anyone, and he was killed, right? Like, and we have not seen any accountability by our court system or by our mayor, who could fire those officers, for example, and that has not happened. So it seems like a continuation of a precedent, and it exposes a rot, right? And it's not just a rot in our system, but a cultural one. We have to stop taking the failures of government to address social ills, to address the scarcity and availability of what are just basic human rights. Wouldn't you want your loved one to be able to have access to mental health care, to have access to stable housing? And when that doesn't happen, we have set a culture of dehumanizing those folks when we see them in public, when we see them publicly struggling. And that is a real problem. And it really drives what our responses are, and also the public discourse around a situation that you've seen. I mean, I had seen some really awful vitriolic messages around this, and it is the allowance of that dehumanization that allows other people to justify the taking of the life of somebody who was a human being, who was loved, who was sick, who needed help, and being like, well, it's okay that happened, or worse, like that it's inevitable that would happen, that we can't do better. We have to believe we can do better, and we can, because there's proof out there that we can.
Well, council member, a really important conversation. I really appreciate you coming on today. You are welcome back anytime. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.